Hey everyone, we're going to look at the first one, number one in section 1.6. Pretty straightforward. Just want to review this with you. Being able to solve exponential equations, logarithmic equations, trig equations, those will be important as we go through the course. This has to solve for the unknown variable, very simple equation, x to the 3/2 power equals 125. Couple of notes about fractional exponents you should understand. When we say x to the 3/2 power, that means the square root of x cubed, or you can think of it as x cubed and then take the square root. The order that you do it does not matter. So the 3, obviously, in the numerator of the fraction is just like we would normally say x cubed is x times x times x. But then the 1/2, if you will, the 2 in the denominator, indicates a square root. So in general, remember that the expression x to the 1 over n is the nth root of x. So for instance, if n is 2, we just write square root. We don't put the index in there. If n is 3, I would put a little 3 here, and that would be the cube root of x, and so on. And then since it's 1 in the numerator, it's just x to the first power. If this 1 is any other number than 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, that's the power of x under the radical, like I have here. Okay, typically for evaluating an expression like this, if you're not using a calculator for sure, you'd want to use this expression here if you can take the square root of x first and then cube it, as opposed to cubing x and then taking the square root. Another important fact to know is if I take x to the a power and then raise that expression to the b power, remember we multiply exponents, right? So for instance, if it's x cubed squared, it's going to be x to the 6th. 3 times 2 is 6, not 3 plus 2, 5. And if you forget this, just think about, what does x cubed squared mean? It means x cubed times x cubed. And how many total x's are we multiplying? 3 here and 3 here. That's obviously x to the 6th. So if you do a simple example, that'll help you remember. All these rules of exponents are on the algebra help sheet that I give you on tests, but you need to be familiar with these. Okay, on to the problem. How do we solve this? Well, if you think about these ideas, then a quick way to do it is to simply raise the expression of both sides to the same power, which is the reciprocal of 3/2, namely 2/3. So I'm going to raise this expression to the 2/3 power, and I have to do the same here, right? Do the same to both sides. Now, why do I do that? Well, right, by this property here, I'm going to multiply exponents. What's 3/2 times 2/3? 3/2 times 2/3 is 1, right? Because, right, the 3's cancel, the 2's cancel, we're just left with 1, right? 3/2 times 2/3 is 1. So this is just x to the first power. I've solved for x. Now, I do have to deal with this. What is 125 to the 2/3 power? Well, again, remember the 3 in the denominator, right? We talked about that, indicates now the cube root. So I'm taking the cube root of 125, and then the 2 means I'm squaring it. Cube root of 125 is 5. If I then square 5, I get 25, and that's your answer. Kind of makes sense to undo what I'm doing in the problem, which is what? Cubing and then taking the square root, for instance. Then to undo that, I'm going to take the cube root and then square to undo those respective operations. Just a little side note, just a little extra problem here. What if I had something like x to the 2/3 equals 16? All right. Well, you say, well, I'm just going to raise both sides to the 3/2 power, which would be correct. But when you raise something to the 3/2 power, or anything over 2, well, any odd number over 2, I guess, 5/2, 1/2, or whatever. For instance, if x squared is 16, I can raise both sides to the 1/2 power. But remember, 1/2 is just the square root. But when we do that in solving the equation, I have to include both the positive and negative roots, right? Don't need to do it for cube roots, because I can take the cube root of a negative number. For instance, the cube root of -8 is a real number. It's -2. And that's because -2 cubed, if you multiply -2 times -2 times -2, right, that's -8. Odd number of negative factors makes it odd. But here, when we take the square root, we got to include both the positive and negative roots, right? Obviously plus or minus 4, because if I square -4, right, negative times negative, I get a positive. So there's 2 solutions here. And we can get more than one solution to an equation, right? Up here, we're just getting one solution, namely 25. Here, we're going to end up with two solutions, plus or minus what? I raised 16 to the 3/2 power, which means this half power means square root of 16. And then I want to cube it. Square root of 16 is 4. 4 cubed is 64. So my solution here, x, is going to be plus or minus 64 in this particular problem. Okay, so just a quick way how to solve exponential equations of this type. And if you need more help with this or have questions, please let me know.